Eric, how are you today?
Fantastic, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. It's so fun to have you on here. Our paths are fairly recently crossed, I think, in our overall journeys. But that's the interesting part. I feel like we should have had our paths crossing for like most of the past 20, 30 years. So I'm really looking forward to diving in here with you today.
I could not agree more. I mean, when things are right, they're right, you know?
Yeah. So let's start with we met through Carnegie Mellon as a place, but in my math, it's about 3.5 years ago, not 23 and a half or so years ago.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the beginning then. Where were you in those early 20s? Why didn't our paths cross? What were you up to?
The time I was starting to grow my network, I realized only in review that I hadn't paid attention to like how I felt the motivation to find out who I didn't yet know but should. And in that case, I had the pleasure of having that idea land in your, I think, LinkedIn inbox. And in the process, I saw you were up to some really cool things. And at the same time, I was thinking, hey, what does innovation mean to other people? And oh, by the way, like I happen to find a foundational trust with friends like yourself who come from similar backgrounds of, in this case, academic pursuits. And um, yeah, it was kind of, I don't know, I was very motivated if you also realize at the time that was right in the middle of I believe, the second wave of COVID. And so that's when the time came back to the quote I'll never forget of like, as an introvert, check on your friends who are extroverts. They're not okay. Right. And so that's where I was just reaching out to anyone I could find that would be open to a conversation to see anything that I could learn from someone that I believe would have a unique perspective like yourself.
That's really interesting that that was what was going on for you. I was a little ahead of you in that before COVID, in somewhere in my early 40s, right after moving east, actually, I sort of started realizing I wasn't exploring my network at all. And it's sort of a slightly different tone of it because I didn't have any form of agenda or goals. But I was looking around and I would see, I would, get the Carnegie Mellon weekly newspaper and like, oh, that sounds cool. Or wow, that person's doing a great thing. And, I'm never in this. And who is this? And why don't I know that person? And I went on my own little crusade to get there. So let's go back in time a little. Where did you go undergrad? And what was your first role out of college?
So undergraduate, I went to Carnegie Mellon University. And straight out of undergrad, I had, first off, several options in front of me. I was very lucky. Um, that include everything from being on an oil rig off of the coast of Oman to how this really cool engineering position came up for being part of the launch vehicle team at Lockheed Martin, the rocket scientist in that case, to another career path that I ultimately chose, which was finally arriving at the point of what I ended up choosing to pursue, which was effectively production engineering for the Black Hawk helicopter. And so that landed me at Sikorsky Aircraft here in Connecticut, where I'm back in now. That allowed me to focus on real time challenges that, well, they need a sophisticated approach to based on the most accelerant, if you will, of addressing core and root problems with creative approaches.
Now, first of all, I've never been in a helicopter. And so the fact that you end up, and I don't know why, by the way, I mean, I guess it's not a normal thing. I guess I don't need to ask why I haven't been in a helicopter. I guess that's pretty normal. Was that a vertical you cared about? Did you care about aviation? Were you coming from a family of flyers? What got you into that side of the world?
To your point, it was something a little more unconventional that it was the only thing I didn't yet understand and how it works, but knew it does, which is the gap in my belief of like, that's what I should focus my time on, right? I understood how a rocket launches. I understand how oil rigs work, right? Like that kind of thinking. Whereas a helicopter, that that doesn't belong just sitting in the air. Like seems to be something I need to learn more about. And so it was that literal that's what convinced me that that was the right use of my time, the best use of my time. But at the same time, like that was one thing I grew up like being excited by, which was aerospace and how things that led me to see how engineering as a career could make me feel like I'm fulfilling something that helps, I hate to say other people literally, but literally that's what became the case.
That's interesting. Did you want to be working on things that were solving those kind of problems? Like when I graduated, my mindset wasn't that way. My mindset was much more, what do I want to do right now? Not only did I have blinders on, I had blinders on. I was looking straight down. It was like, what's the next letter in the alphabet? I might as well have been asking. I didn't really think. Were you obsessed with getting your career into a vertical that you cared about, like wanting to learn about the thing? Like, how did that come to be?
I wish I could say yes, but no. I think this is only in retrospect. I could tell you I wasn't that far ahead of you in that case. I mean, I was thinking like it was just cool, right? And that it was something I always thought was cool. So like that was a good check in the box. But I say that only in retrospect because I know people who were so laser focused and find themselves in a vertical that they had been committed to for years. It led them to do the undergrad work they did, and even based down to the project and class they took, aligned with what they knew would work in that vertical. Like I was so far from that. Sounds like you, as you were, that I fell into that. And in retrospect, that made me feel like, wait, this is actually something I both know I could do, know I'm pretty good at, and that led to some really great opportunities to follow. But
So
it was to that point that, yeah, I can't give myself too much credit.
I like that. In one of my first conversations, so a thing I had learned once long ago is that walking is a controlled fall, and I think about that as sort of a career journey analogy a lot of the time, right? Because when you say, if I were to say it's a controlled fall, you might be like, ugh, I don't want a controlled fall, that I might fall. But you also wouldn't think that when you're walking, you're running the risk of falling. How long did you stay at Sikorsky, and what did you really get out of that opportunity?
8.5 years, and it was the
Okay.
fastest 8.5 years of my life. Going in fact, within the first year of that 8.5, I was like, this is going to be a 2-3 year job tops. Like I was so frustrated by so many things I'd come to experience. And then I basically blinked, and then 8.5 had gone by. But through that, it led me to find my way into a role that opened my eyes beyond what I knew what to articulate about. And in that case, it made me realize I don't yet know enough about the world in which I operated beyond the process of engineering. And meanwhile, I'm like, what is this business thing? You keep talking about funding for projects, like that's the closest I get to business. And so as an engineer, I kept thinking to myself, well, where can I learn more than what I know now in that world? And it was an MBA. So pursued an MBA, and that's what got me into realizing what I should be focusing my time in, which ran back to what I ended up focusing on in undergrad research, which was automotive and automation in automotive for self-driving cars. So that's what got me into what I found my way out of an MBA into what became my work towards the next chapter.
It's so interesting to me to hear you talk about that time that way, because to me, you are a very methodical person who does think ahead and look ahead. And I think of you and as a frameworks kind of person. Like I look at you as someone like when new information or when a new opportunity or when maybe I should get an MBA, et cetera, that you both like, you strike me as that. And it's interesting because I wouldn't have guessed that your business acumen is so recent. Would you say that that was a big learning curve for you? Was moving from eng to biz like, oh my god, I didn't even know this world existed? Tell me a little bit about that, because I did that journey undergrad in like a year, right, which is a very very different thing than doing it, in your late 20s, early 30s.
Totally. I would tell you that it was a very weird thing for me. And I say that loosely because what it led me to was the recognition that I almost just learned a new language, whereas I knew the underlying content, right? And the way to communicate it. So, to your point about frameworks and methodical thinking, I thought I needed to know more to better understand what people needed to understand themselves, right? But the reality is they're still solving problems in their own way and just for different topics. But at that point, what the MBA did for me was realize I'm already able to do what I need to be able to do. The question is now, how do I better communicate that to people so they understand what they need my help with, by a better term? And that's how it helped me pivot both my thinking, my way of, well, developing a new way of learning, let alone different languages to start speaking and translating through. And that was the beginning of my, as I keep saying, my second chapter of my career, leaving the engineering discipline into, well, way more different, I hate to say literally offices of enterprise, but I've been working across several since because I realized I know how to help a lot of different challenges. The question is, who needs it first?
So when you approach learning, right? We obviously when we started undergrad, and that was sort of the end of it for me. You at a point recognized that you wanted to do a large amount of learning, MBA, but I also think of you as a lifelong learner kind of person. How do you approach it today when you want to, for example, get into vibe coding or any of these other areas where your business and tech acumen all come together? What are you doing in today's world? Let's just go straight into 2025. How does Eric learn?
Two letters, AI. Yeah, I half
What
joke.
what what's what do they stand for some Apple? No.
Apple
Uh
Insider. Apple
Apple
Insider.
cider?
Apple Insider. No, I joke because I don't know if you know this, but in French it's IA. They literally flip the term. But that aside,
They're not winning that one as from they're doing as well as that as the province of Quebec is getting the people to say ordinateur for computer. Like, sorry, it's a MacBook or maybe not, but
totally. So yeah, the short answer is I now my first response to anything is throwing the not the question into AI, but the question of what question should I be asking into AI.
Well,
And in
how does
that
that
case,
apply? Like, is that built into your prompting? Like, how do you actually approach that?
but exactly, that's the general prompt I start with almost every time, which was matching a topic to what would an executive consultant be asking of this topic, right? And I don't say executive consultant broadly, but like this idea of like who's the expert, and by the way, what would they be asking about this? So part identifying who is the expert. Second is like in that case, I don't want to just learn from anyone about this, and also who should tell me like how do I know who's the expert on this? That's the other thing. So let's figure out where do I find expertise, and then learn from that in a way that makes sure I'm just asking a better question sooner that should and has been proven to accelerate the time to a good enough appreciation of what I need to know in order to move.
You just brought up a term I like, good enough. In fact, not to plug my startup, but a lot of how we've always thought about what Augie can do is help you make good enough videos for your marketing needs. And I've come to use good enough as a non-pejorative, right? Good enough to me in 2025 means it's good enough to do its job. It's not the best of a thing, but good enough doesn't mean it's sort of a piece of crap. So how about you though? Because again, we both come from very similar, like wanting things to be great and often settling at good enough. Has your mentality around that changed in the modern era?
Absolutely, because I think, like you, Jeremy, I've been pursuing an entrepreneurial career for the past few years, and like in that case, speed and agility are our superpowers, right? So only if you were to embrace this idea of good enough proactively are you better fit for whatever the work you're looking to do in a way that makes you competitive with people that otherwise may have better distribution, better scale, better whatever. But like by the time that you've done 1,000 cycles on them, they've only still done three, right? And that is it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I often struggle to put words around part of what you said because you said it well, and I sort of stab at things like that. One of my last episodes was with a guy named David Arnett, who was a chess prodigy, and when you're talking to someone like that, they have a way of framing sort of problem solving. I think it's a really interesting time we're in because we can use AI to get the ball instantly down part of the field, and people like us, me, you, David, are going to use AI far more effectively than others. What do you think it is that gives us that leg up? Is it the product mentality? Is it education? Is it, I look at it like I think I actually see ChatGPT as a different tool than a lot of my peers do. I'm curious if you find similar discussions happening out there.
Definitely. And the thing I've come to realize about it is only people like us appreciate the value of momentum because inertia is very strong generally, right? So don't forget the majority of people are either have chosen not to fight inertia or just gone with it and more importantly go with the flow, that mentality. We've just chosen to take the opposite tack, right? And in that case, it's led us to realize we just have to get going. We don't care where we're going or let's say what the end game is necessarily to start, but we've started. And once we start, we know we'll keep going because that's the game, right? So now we have better tooling, for a better term, and allows us to go farther quicker so that we can learn quicker and then do something about it quicker. And that's like the snowballing effect that we all have come to realize is the what entrepreneurship is.
Given that, and given the framework we have for learning, how I'll fess up. I don't feel I'm learning as much. I feel almost if Google gave me the superpower to be able to like find a thing and now here's an answer. Aha, now I have the answer. Now it's almost like, aha, now I've done the work, even though I haven't. You know, I'm curious what kind of impact you're finding on yourself.
I've actually thought a lot about this, because you're hitting on something that I've also felt a little bit of exposure to, for that term. Um, Back to learning, we grew up under the guise that you need to learn something in order to be, well, an expert practitioner in it, right? At the end of the day, we did that. I think indexed a little too far on this glorified continuum in my mind on the side of information versus broadly skills. That
Okay.
is then how you derive action and result from applying that. And I think that this is getting to the point, though, is like what are we learning at the end of the day? And it's less about maybe the information, because you're right, it's not nearly as valuable as it used to be as a currency. Whereas the results, so you can get it into production and get something from it quicker, that's the new thing we're actually learning, which is much more malleable and fungible for that case. That it becomes something that is a superpower of ours, right? So
Yeah.
that you're right, we can effectively do more with less, which was always the goal, through which it shows that that is something that people over time will start to value, I think, a lot more, especially as it trickles down into education, is like, hey, what, not just what can you do, but as you know, the joke was consultants, they don't do anything, right? But what they do actually is the thing that is a skill-based approach versus this content, since they're rarely verticalized like a practitioner from the industry would be. So
Right.
that's the rub, I think.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair, especially the comment around trickling down to education. I was on a road trip with my kids this weekend. We were talking about my 18-year-old is about to go off to college, made a comment. She thinks it's amazing that they now are teaching some degree of programming in high school, but they don't teach you how a computer works. And I think about some of these things like I had to learn I had to learn the periodic table, right? Like that was high school in the 80s was memorize this thing, you know. Now, thankfully, they don't go to that level, though there's still a lot more rote memorization that I think is necessary. But now I look even slightly further ahead. It's like, what should we rote learn at all? Is it the learn a framework? You know, they always say learn the framework for learning, but now it's the you can just you can practically master things without learning them. You know, I think it's one of these times where we have no base knowledge, right? Like my mom will make comments like, "Oh, people should learn this," and I'm like, "Should they? Do
Why?
we?" You know, kids learn cursive. You know, now DocuSign does the cursive for them. When you think about having young kids and they're about to go through a system, I'm coming on the other end of it. How much of that's going to be the education at home versus what they're actually doing in the schools? Where are you feeling about that these days?
Well, taking two steps back, I did Carnegie Mellon undergraduate, Columbia University for a master's in engineering, and then NYU for an MBA. So I say that all as a product of some of the most expensive institutions in the world. I could tell you that I don't necessarily believe my 2.5-year-old uh, will be someone I say should go pursue a higher education the way it's defined now when it gets there. I think so much is going to be transforming as we speak and going forward into much more skills based things. And in that case, I'm not going to saying knowledge goes to zero, but at the same time, what if everyone has all the knowledge of everyone all the time, right? That's kind of where I believe things are going, so that almost anyone could use that as an asset more than anything in real time. Then the question is, what do you do with it? Well, now we're getting into a much better conversation, right?
Right.
So then it's about going into the, I hate to say liberal arts, but something in that world where it requires a lot more creativity and maybe more synchronous thinking and things that get you able to be more valuable to more people, more in more flexible sense, right? That I think the trades have been doing for so long and underappreciatedly not gotten enough credit for that, because I think at the end of the day, we force them into this rabbit hole of like if it's like a next best answer to higher education. But the reality is it's very clear what they can do for people in a given trade, and there's still, it's a drought in that world because the market has not valued that nearly enough, right? So like that's part of, I think, what where the tides are moving.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think the tides are definitely moving toward like how you're going to need some skills. You're going to need to figure out some way to navigate this coming world, because as much as we can say, well, it's always been someone said to me, it's today is the calmest, least hectic day of the rest of your life, or something like that. I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm not sure I fully agree with it anymore, but it is a fascinating time, especially to have children that are different ages, right? What I like about my eldest, she's going to go to RISD, is I believe that's the kind of place where she'll learn thinking frameworks, right? She'll learn about problem solving, not how to answer this question. So coming back to you, let's go back in time again for a bit, though. Let's go back. You've got the MBA in hand. Transportation is a bit of a theme. What happened next for you?
Yeah, I joined actually an old Sikorsky colleague who had already left Sikorsky before I did at a company called Harman International. For those who don't know, it's primarily an audio company that grew through acquisition into supplying audio solutions to car makers to make their embedded speaker systems and integrated sound solutions. Now, it was interesting, not just because of the work I did in what they called open innovation, which was in the office of the CTO, looking into how their IP portfolio could be commercialized with partners. But it turns out within 8 months of me joining, the whole company was acquired for $8 billion by Samsung.
Right.
So that brought me out to Silicon Valley from New York. And that whole thing opened my eyes to all the ways that companies were looking into new technologies, but at the same time, having no idea how to bring them into whatever their business focus is. So it's kind of what got me excited about the world of Silicon Valley. And as you, Jeremy, know, the things that people are trying at a much quicker quip that I think back to the cycles they get out of being in Silicon Valley. It's a really interesting culture that is definitely unique to where we are in the New York area.
Yeah, I think about that. I spent 19 years in the Bay Area, and there's something unquestionably about what culture and what everything about that brings. I don't know what it's like now. I know that it is constantly changing, right? Moved out there sort of at the beginning of the dot-com bubble, and moved out in 20 it was 2017, I think, between labeled phases, maybe crypto, blockchain, etc. When you think about the influence of being in the Bay Area has on you as an innovator, do you think it's still a must spend time there phase that we're in? Do you think you can get away with fully remote tech lifestyle? What do you think of it in 2025 and beyond?
I think that I would zoom out just a little bit more and say, all that being said, the thing I can't recommend enough is get people to travel and learn how other people work, right? And
Yeah.
so doing work wherever you are, Silicon Valley or not, you should still leave it. Especially if you're in Silicon Valley, you should leave Silicon Valley and see how other people work. But I think getting access to and like learning from back to how we learn, right? Getting to learn how other people learn, let alone how they work, that definitely has opened my eyes even further to realize, there's no one best way ever, right? But rather, let's do a like problem solution match that requires a lot of steps in between that make sure like we're just appreciating as much that we have access to through the network we build in the process.
How much time and attention did you personally invest in the networking side of things? Because that's been a theme that we've chatted about already a couple of times. Was it at any point, did it become a very deliberate part of what you were doing, or just sort of was a through line that's now obviously increased in your world?
Yeah, it went from approximately 5% of my time to 85%
Wow.
in a little over 10 years. And I say that it wasn't a straight line, but I've come to appreciate the value of having, I say broadly, the right network, but in curating it in a way that has made it clear that I prefer to spend time at what I call like the fringe of big companies that help them understand back to right solution for right problem matching. But like this idea of, hey, just because we have what we have, some people refuse to acknowledge there's someone out there that could be better. But at the end of the day, that's what I believe is the most powerful thing to have and wield, is making sure that we've already aligned ourselves with the right, I hate to say dance partner, but like in the process, even the role I took after leaving Samsung at Ford Motor Company in Silicon Valley was leading partnerships and development of how collaborations across commercial partners could be supportive of something powerful, strategic initiatives. So I say that all to point out, I think, yeah, it's become a growing amount of things that had it served a purpose for me to start growing from 5%, like I mentioned, to more, because I didn't even know who else I should know to get out of the rut I found myself in 8.5 years after Sikorsky, of realizing everybody I knew it was in aerospace, first off, let alone in this subset, the pigeonhole of helicopter vertical flight, they call it, for a very small part of the world. So finding out, who's working in automotive, let alone who's doing what, that was where I started realizing, wait, I need to really make this a proactive, both muscle of mine to do it more often. But then I don't know who knows who.
Right.
So in that case, I have to start meeting people without a clear goal to start, because yeah, I don't know what they know that I don't yet, but should again. And that's what got me to be much more comfortable, confident in, let alone knowing that that would be a valuable part of my time.
You know, it's so interesting. I'll be transparent. I don't think I've ever put on the sort of hat of, okay, Jeremy, go spend the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever, actively building your network. I've been thrust into things each time where it's like, bye, you're at CBS now, go meet people. Bye, you're traveling to Germany, go meet people. And it's an interesting point where you and I met through a deliberate connection, a deliberate sequence of events that actually had nothing to do with either of our quote unquote jobs at the moment. Do you think that in today's world, can you get away with either approach? Can any, if you're a 20 something going out into the world for the first time, what tips might you give someone to say, like, because we obviously both agree, go build that network. What might you say to someone who's like, yeah, I don't know how?
I would recommend that they start, frankly, the easiest way that they know how to, which was, to me, LinkedIn, right? Start somewhere that, first off, it's a community space. It's kind of designed to network, literally, but realizing you could almost get access to anyone immediately, right? And through that, figure out what would make them want to spend time with you, right? And prioritize a meeting with you. And whether it's a common connection or some way to network that's the thing I would want them to learn from it, the process more than anything, of how can you get in touch with the right people who, by the way, it's up to you to define who the right person is and what their why. So
Yeah,
it's like, just build that muscle that makes it you more confident operating how you get to that person. But then, if I hate to say how to measure it, but like improve that, is the number of steps required to take, when it may start at eight, hypothetically, eight different people you have to reach out to get to that one. The hope is that over time gets to seven, then to six. And then that's the point, that over time you'll know enough people, and enough of the right people at least, that means to you have the network you believe you should have this whole time for that one reason, whatever it is. So that I couldn't recommend that as a way to start again,
yeah,
coupled with get really well comfortable with the idea of meeting people without the understanding of, again, who they know, where you don't
right.
necessarily know what to talk about, but like that's just where you go to a bar, go to a conference, whatever. But like, at the end of the day, just introduce yourself and realize the speed at which you can get to figure out what it is that you guys have in common, let alone build rapport through.
I
That
love
pays
that.
huge dividends.
Yeah, I had three interns this past spring, all high school, and we gave them a variety of projects they could choose from. They all wanted to do influencer marketing because their whole world influencers. Okay, we built a whole thing for them, and part of it was, okay, write your first pitch, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a second. I for 3 out of 3, and they did a nice job. And obviously, I made it. You can use ChatGPT. I do. Why wouldn't you? Right? Like, I never understood closed book exams because it's such not how the world works. But whatever, we won't go into that. What I noticed was 3 for 3 immediately went to writing copy about what we did.
Hmm.
And I said, well, do they care? And we spent this whole lot of time. I said, look, you're at the beginning of your career. This is the perfect time to understand. You can get anyone's attention if you know what they want, right? It's not about what we want. We've got to figure out how to make what we want what they want, right? And so I'm going to, like, for anyone listening and doubling down even on what Eric just said, not only should you be going out and networking, you've got to figure out the other person's need, right? Like you might run into a me who's always willing to meet a new person and loves that experience. You might run into another person who would love to help you, but isn't necessarily quick to be open or needs a hook or needs a thing. So putting yourself out there, going out and meeting people without necessarily a specific goal of yours other than to meet them, right? I think that was part of our first meeting, Eric, because I don't think you and I even had like agenda. It was like, hey, we both went to CMU and we had this one person in common, so we should probably meet, right? And it was like, okay, we'll see what happens with that. I can't emphasize enough that potential serendipity of that one rando networking event that seemed like a waste of time at that happy hour. Like go make, get a new LinkedIn contact per day and see where it takes you.
So my turn to take the Wayback Machine a little bit.
Yeah.
And in order to point out that, to your point, serendipity, that what was lost in COVID, right? Where nothing was serendipitous. It was all planned. That was part of the growing problem that, well, networking took a hit because at the end of the day, people came with specific things. If you can't help me next, right? And then all of a sudden, we know where that ends.
Right.
Whereas I think that just reminded all of us that out of not just COVID, but then this idea of blending physical and, well, digital networking tools, only through that could you start developing the opportunity for that to happen. And if you don't design for that to happen, then that's part of your challenge and constraint you're putting on yourself. Because that's, I believe like you that serendipity is one of the biggest and both biggest opportunities and least well understood in a great way.
Yeah. I mean, my co-founder, JT, and I, we met through Go. We were always at the same Future of TV, TV of Tomorrow. Thanks, Tracy. We were always at these conferences and we started to notice each other and, we'd end up at the post-event drinks, whatever. And now in the pandemic, we did a podcast and now we run a startup. And I'm so grateful for events that today, if someone's like, you want to go to a conference, I'd be like, oh. But the truth is that's the wrong instinct, right?
Oh, but then we, not to go to too far in the rabbit hole, but like to your point, conferences where people figured out, like, I don't need to go to subject myself to the crappiness of conference hospitality in order to do what I know I need to do, right? That's what they overcame. Only once they figured out that, wait a minute, sitting at home on my computer doing this day in, day out isn't what I want either. So then the pendulum swung back, like, ooh, maybe we want some conferences. And meanwhile, now CES is back to being the biggest event for all tech nerds that ever happened still.
So I want to take us to roughly up to today. Now we'll hit the part where we met, which was as you were about to begin a career transition. You were getting ready to leave Ford, etc. And what you may or may not know is we had met, for those out there, we met on some Zooms and then eventually went out for a lunch. At our lunch is when I showed you the first idea I had for Augie, which at the time was just going to be maybe one of several projects I was going to embark on. And you were the one to be like, I would invest in that. And that was the moment for me. I was like, oh, really? What you don't know is the very next day I had the exact same thing happen. And those back-to-back moments are why I'm doing this startup. So I either can thank or blame you for this part of my journey. I'd love to hear where your journey has taken you to now. So what have you been up to the past couple of years?
Ever since my time at Ford, which ended in December of 2022, I've been hanging my own shingle, helping companies that in my network again, people that I knew, understand what mostly artificial intelligence can do for their business. And at the end of the day, AI, of course, has been the topic of, frankly, everyone at this point. But even before that was on the scene, there were people asking about not just, hey, what my background in robotics, for instance, can do for whether it's manufacturing or, let's say, some other semiconductor related things. But then how, what was less about the hardware, which is my background personally, actually, but the software side of it, of like the brain, the control, the understanding of how it integrates into their systems, that's where things evolve quickly. And through that experience, that was where I was leaving San Francisco to come back to East Coast too. So coincided with going back to my network here in the East Coast, it's continued in that direction, which is helping my network understand like what about technology can help them in their day in, day out jobs. And by the way, make them way better what they're doing at the end of the day. Because that's, of course, no one wants to hear or wants to absolve whatever anxiety they have around it replacing them. So that's not the point at all. Whereas those that take a proactive challenge of figuring out what they could do with it, now we're talking. So it's been through that experience that I figured out, both sitting on that same fringe of the companies. Hey, from the outside, how can I help you look in? I'm excited to share that in the next week I'll be joining a new company that is looking for help as a consultant, leading the professional service of consulting for AI, IoT, the Internet of Things, as well as cloud technologies, to help clients understand what's possible through the lens of business case development. And so, excited to take on that new challenge in a few short days.
Amazing. And what do you think at this stage of your career, in that, it's been your solo shingle for a while, you're joining a large organization, but you don't sort of own the thing anymore. I've gone through that phase a few times in my career, and I go in and out of enjoying that. Where are you right now, like knowing that you're going to tell someone like me a bunch of good advice because you're a really smart guy, and someone like me out there is going to, like, maybe half listen, maybe zero listen, maybe three-quarters listen, who knows? How does that sit with you right now at this, as you're at this stage?
It didn't sit well for a while in the midst of all of what I've been experiencing, because to your point, I'm not doing anything anymore, right? As we joke with product people. But I've overcome that through, well, learning a new skill, which is the high fidelity prototyping of, well, digital systems, that through a tool called Replit. And I say that to point out, you know, I keep bringing up business case development as the thing I'll be focused on. But that's the document that gets left over and given to the CFO eventually. But through the process, which is what I'm excited to say is how I've overcome this anxiety personally, is the idea of being able to, within hours, not minutes, but hours, put a great high fidelity prototype in front of someone that is highly representative of what we had talked about in a meeting yesterday, through which they get them to feel like, oh wait, this could actually really help us, and is exactly what I meant, right? Or it's not, for that matter. And
Yeah.
that's a much more empathy building discussion tool than anything, that has helped me get from the 10% listener into a even 60% listener, which that alone is just snowballing again. It just accelerates the time to what becomes something, some momentum being built through.
Sure. I use Replit as well. I'm going to take us right into there because it's such a fun product. What percent, I'm curious, I rarely actually go into the code itself. I have enough of a background in programming that I could go in and tweak. I usually maybe review just for personal understanding. But to be candid, most of what I'm doing is through the agent.
Yes.
For those of you who've never tried it, Replit is a vibe coding platform, aka prompt to app would be another way to think about it. So if you want to build a website that lets you track your steps compared to your dog, whatever, you could whip up a demo of that in Replit while you're still listening to this podcast, right? So that's the quick definition. How are you using it as a platform?
At the end of the day, I also have learned that it's not worth my time to go into the code, because I found a better option. And the short answer is a tool chain, right? That's what they're calling it, the term of finding the right tools purpose built together, where you take the output of one as input to the other, that builds a certain workflow. That workflow to me is, first off, I usually start with a virtual discussion like this, with some codified expert of the topic. And that is recorded, transcription is output, that becomes input to a platform called Chat PRD. Now, that tool allows me to go from just a transcript into creating the scope of a project that would be helpful to what the topic of that discussion covered. And through that, I then throw that into ChatGPT, sorry, in this case, Claude, I've changed my mind, Claude, in order to say, Claude, take this scope and make effectively like a PRD4 Replit agent input. And then that is what I put in the Replit agent input as input, and it goes and builds it. And 9 times out of 10, it nails what we're trying to do the first time. So it's
I
fascinating.
love that workflow. I think that is a lot of fun. How far do you take things in Replit? Have you productized anything? And so I'm gonna use the following definition. So you've hit the deploy button, or you've deployed it on some other instance on Git or wherever your Vercel, whatever platform. And it's an actual, not just here's the prototype of how it could be, but this here does all of the things. Have you productized anything fully yet?
Yes. So I'm back to hanging my own shingle still. I've been helping, well, an airline in the UK that a lot of people have taken, helping them create literally a single operations digital system that includes what currently has, well, I think it's across 12 different stations in one room, right? And through that experience, I've actually had to publish, not just publish with go to production, but then put it in Git, through which I've gotten their real time APIs integrated and them to be able to use it. And they're like, "I'm sorry, you did that in 2 weeks? Like, what is this?" And so
It's scary.
it's back to the same accelerated feedback tool. That's what's great for, because it really is representative of what they should have or should have had this whole time.
What do you think? Have you heard the term basically like full stack entrepreneur?
Yes.
I've been hearing this a lot recently, where the idea being you not only can come up with the idea, you can get the working prototype, you can get the working MVP, you can get the working monetization engine up, get the marketing channel, get the sales cycle, all of these things. How much do you think this is for everybody versus for a very, very small few? Because I'm sure we both read the same newsletters that make it sound like, hey, 8 billion people, you're all about to be your own entrepreneurs.
It depends, short answer, because I think, to your point, that's the only thing I would put money against right now, is that more people will start being able to do more things soon. The question is over what horizon, of course. But that being said, I think the more playbooks get built around that, the more easily people come to see what motivates them to try it out and pursue something they believe in. And that is, again, the same snowballing thing. So I'm excited about that. The full stack. I mean, back 2 steps. I think it'll be silly. No one will pursue, I should say, traditional entrepreneurship without that, once it gets to a certain point too, because it's a waste of your time and everyone around you, right?
That's a really interesting comment. I think that's something I had not heard before or thought about, is that if you can't do that, where are you, right? And I think that'll be an interesting new bar. Like, if all you want to do is prototype apps, where are you in this new stack of things, right? I think the most fascinating thing right now is like, what is the new company stack? Marketers, salespeople, entrepreneurs, managers, all of the different roles. That's all up for grabs in my eyes.
And you reminded me, I think back to your point about solo full stack entrepreneurs thinking, I would almost elevate what we've all been talking about, MVP thinking, into MVB, right? And the idea of like minimum viable business, that is like this compared to what it used to be, just to get in front of, or something in front of someone who'd be willing to pay you for it, right? And
Yeah.
in that case, that's going to be really interesting to see. And of course, as this gets published, all academics will get excited about this. But right, how do we get something educating of, how do we define it? How do we build it? How do we sell it? Back to your point about like, be prepared to do that whole thing, or I should say, that whole thing is a full stack sense.
Not only that, like, we're at the point where realistically today, if you're listening and you don't believe this is true, we could do it right now. Same day to revenue, like idea to revenue in an hour or something, like seems like a thing you could do. It seems to me like you get the right kind of mindset and the right kind of dedication. I'll bet you or I could go onto Twitch and spend an hour live streaming and use our networks on LinkedIn and wherever, prototype up like, oh, you guys are looking for a thing like this. Here, we've made one. It's $1. Who wants it? Right. And I'll bet you'll make your first dollar. Like, that whole time to first dollar should be shrinking quickly.
And it goes to zero again, because technically one will be able to publish something and there's immediate distribution to millions, right? Like that's where things are going.
Yeah.
So
distribution is this is one thing I've known since I've started this startup. The new moat is distribution. It's not who can build it. Anyone can build it. Who can build it better? I would agree that there's still a lot of opportunity for those with more taste. I mean, taste and judgment are the assets, right? So I can probably do a better job at an app than someone who's never done one before, but that's only defensible to a certain degree,
Exactly.
right? When you think of this, I want to throw a question at you. I think if you and I lived through similar eras in the 2000s, the gotcha question was, what would stop Google from doing what you're doing, right? Which was always sort of facetious because even though Google's had pseudo infinite resources, it still wasn't the way it really worked, right? However, I think about, like, I use Replit. How far would it take? How far away is ChatGPT from just being Replit also?
Not very far, right? Because technically they could both take one of their larger models or smaller, I'm kidding, actually smaller models to start and
Yep.
give it a new, storefront. And that storefront could overnight create the ability for people to do something at least as good, if not better. And by the way, that's the other point of like, hey, some companies, especially those that existed in some part in the Bay Area, that looked at their Bay Area resources as prototyping, like business prototyping resources, because that was, again, look at the muscle you get out from that type of arena of working. But at the end of the day, that what they used to call, like, venture studios or something like that, accelerators companies, this is going to be that for the type of people they hire for, with the expertise of knowing not just how to use it, but how to use it for that specific need, whatever that is, as they develop it, right? So I think that's going to be a really interesting future of work, but not too distant future of work, kind of hiring, requisition, development thing.
I love that. Eric, your journey's been fascinating. You've almost worked on rocket ships, which I think is really cool. And now you're in a very different phase. Briefly though, how do you define success today?
Well, I can tell you it's not just monetary. I think that at the end of the day, because of all the work that I've led myself through, having the right people around me, in addition to, sure, having the right income through the work, but that in order to make sure that you're confident enough in who you're spending your time with, that you feel fulfilled in the process, right? So I think that those three things together are kind of what makes it feel like you've done enough of the right things, not just to meet the ability to enjoy what you've succeeded through, but felt you've actually done it in the process.
Love that. Eric, how do people find you? Where do you want to send them? Or, and if not to you, where on this internet would you like to send a person?
Well, I use my middle initial more now than ever because I'm realizing that a not so good friend in actually Quebec, that Eric X West, who is a rapper that I don't agree with a lot of things. He took a lot of the social media attention away from just broadly Eric West searches. So I say that all as a half joke to point out that Eric R. West on LinkedIn, super easy to find me. And yeah, I'd look forward to meeting any friend of yours.
Well, that's great. And tongue in cheek, I'm against all things X. So there we go. Now we have a twofer. Just kidding, everybody. Eric, thanks again for sharing that with us. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we're going to need to do even more of them. And good luck with this next step in your career. And thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day.